So, uh, I guess this is my tournament recap in regards to this. There's no real look into what actually ended up happening. Um, with the deck, I believe that I did pretty well, but I do have some notes compared to how this deck should run, what it should be doing in the future. So I'm actually going to go over the tournament report in regards to this and show off what ended up happening. So round one, I ended up facing against Noah Benjamin. He was the guy that top aided with Draco Striker in the last YCS. It was really fun, but the problem was this deck can handle that deck pretty well because even though they can accrue resources really quickly, you basically go out of your way to remove those resources. So game one, pretty much what a normal Prank Kid board would go for. And I was able to outbeat my opponent through all of that. Game two, he went first. I ended up bricking, and it just didn't go through well. And then game three, I ended up going for the 4 summons, and he attempted to Nibiru me. I told him that it was only 4 summons, and that was pretty much how that went. He tried to make a comeback board. I went Washer Bow Wow. So that all my monsters couldn't be destroyed by battle or card effects. My opponent just decided to give it to me because we were in time because of that. Then I ended up facing against a 55 card Orcust. And one really big thing about this deck is I don't run any type of back row removal in the main or side deck. And that ended up losing me games because he activated Mystic Mine and I had no way to play. So I literally just passed and drew until he had a way to out the board, and he did. And that happened for both games. Game 3 was against Lunalight Orcust. I ended up winning that. Both games were with the Utopia double combo. I'm actually considering removing that because now with Nibiru, the deck can't make the double or nothing combo and still survive. Once you pull it off, and the only time you're actually going to want to do that is against Sky Strikers, and you're not going to be able to pull that off because you're going to have to use all your resources to dump it into a roaster, and then after that you need to set up some sort of defense in case you don't survive the next turn. The next one was against Salamangreat. I ended up winning against him. It was a lot less of a problem for me because game 1 he gave it to me, and then game 2 it was drawn out until just barely before time, and he didn't notice my plan was on the board. He made his big Salamangreat Link 3 and didn't remember to spin my back row, and because of that I was able to I had a red reboot face down, and I activated the red reboot and went off for combo for that turn. The next one was against Pendulum. In game 1, he ended up making a 7-8 board, and I couldn't handle that. So, and then game 2, I bricked really hard, so it was the overall loss. Actually, that one was I faced against 2 Pendulum players, so that one was that one was the one where I actually overextended, tried to make my play, and Nibiru'd me, and then it just went into loss from there. I activated Mystic Mine. He had the Master Endymion on the scale. Jackal King was on the board. So he just activated another spell. Jackal King got to 4. He had 2 other counters on the board, and he just proceeded to activate the scale, blow up everything, and attack for game. The next one was against, what is this? Pendulum. Nekroz. So game 1, this one was pretty interesting. Since I run 3 Mystic Mine in the deck, he runs Extravagance. Game 1, I ended up going first, and I made my board, and I didn't go into Butler early enough, and he summoned the vanities on me, and I proceeded to cry on the inside. And then because he summoned the vanities on me, and he used Extravagance, he had banished his Phoenix. So what I did was when I drew for my turn, I drew into a Mystic Mine. I activated Mystic Mine and set a Prank Kid in my hand because I had another Prank Kid at hand. And I was hoping that he had the Phoenix so that he would attempt to pop my Phoenix by using his 2 monsters, or at least the Vanity's Fiend. And then he didn't have any way to out that, so I had no way to go through my plays. But what ended up happening is, since he didn't have any way to blow up my back row because he didn't run any back row removal in his main deck, and I didn't run any way to stop his Vanity's Fiend on the board, it was just a set pass. It wasn't Vanity's Fiend, it was Vanity's Ruler. It was just a set pass game. And then eventually, since I had Desired and he had Extravagance, I was going to lose, and then I drew into Pranks. So I activated Pranks, and it was basically me just shuffling monsters and Prank Kids cards back into the deck and drawing one over and over again until I was managing to deck my opponent out. We went into about 25, 30 minutes into time because of that. And then game 2, he went first. He summoned the Vanity's Ruler. I scooped it up. Game 3, we had like 2 minutes left in time. He said, you know what, man, you got this. I don't run the Nibiru on the side, and you're just going to do your full combo, and it's going to take about 3 minutes. So that was a win for me. The next one was against Pendulum, faced against the FTK variant. And I guess he's been FTKing people all day, but I didn't end up getting FTK'd. Game 1, I ended up getting it because my opponent ended up making that really big negate board, and I pushed through it enough till I could get the Mystic Mine on the board, and he didn't have the out. He knew that I had the Pranks on board, so I was just shuffling everything back into the deck. And then game 2, he bricked. He said, you know what, you got this, because he just made Electromite and passed. Let's see here. I think this is the 7th round. No, it was the 8th round, because I ended up facing in Sky Striker, and it was a local player here, so he knows exactly how my deck plays because I played him so many times, and he basically outed all my board the entire time. I had no way to accrue any resources. Game 1, he went first, and then game 2, he flipped up Summon Limit, and my smart audacity, apparently, was to normal summon Denko, go into Washer, and then not attack into the Shizuku. So I just scooped it up from there. And then the final round, which was against my worst matchup, which was Magical Musketeer. Muskets are just incredibly oppressive for this deck. They stop your fusion summon card, and then they can blow up your resources. They can negate your monster effects. It's really hard to go through them. And as much as I want to say, oh, well, I just made Butler and blew him up, I can't because they run anti-destruction. So they are literally the counter to this deck, and it's really hard to say that, but Muskets are a really hard counter for this deck. I ended up facing my 2 worst matchups, which was Pendulum and Muskets. And normally I would be able to handle decks that are like back row heavy, because I do run the Mystic Mine, and then the Mystic Mine gets me far enough to get the Roaster onto the board, and then the Roaster just blows up everything. But I couldn't get there, and it pretty much was a loss for me. So the total turnout for me was, the Musket player, game 1, drew all the way out until 10 minutes, and then on 10 minutes, we played it out, and then about halfway through those 10 minutes, he gave me a questionable look. I had forgotten to resolve Fansies properly, and I summoned 2 monsters onto the board. I activated Instant Fusion to summon a Rocket, and then I realized that my Fansies didn't resolve. So I said, hey, I didn't activate Fansies. Do you mind if I just send it? I have not drawn any cards. There are no other cards that have manipulated in my hand. He called a judge over. The judge ended up ruling in my favor to send the Fansies because there was no other interruption into the gameplay. However, I believe he ended up cheating and added an extra Musket to hand. It didn't end up changing anything because the next turn I made a Washer and Bow Wow, and he tried to out the board hard enough to try and kill me, but he didn't have any ways to do that, and he said, you know what, you got this, and it was just enough into time that I ended up getting the loss. So the total turnout for my regional recap, sadly enough, I went 5, 3, and 1. I got 54th place, and it wasn't very satisfying to say the least about the fact that my Prank Kids deck it didn't run very well for the deck. In retrospect, I should have taken out the Utopia Devil, knowing that Nibiru is now a card, because I did have the 4-summon combo, and most people that run the Nibiru can't handle the 4-summon combo, except for Muskets, obviously. And I should have ran backer removal so that, in fact, I would be able to handle the oppressive Mystic Mine myself, because if my opponent activated Mystic Mine and just set pass until they were able to go into their plays, I was just kind of dead in the water. So overall, it wasn't that bad of a turnout. I do hate the fact that I didn't resolve my... that I ended up facing in Strikers, and I ended up losing because of that. Because of the fact of that Denko situation. If not, it would have been a draw. 5-2-1 would have been fine. I would have been able to pull it out to a draw, because we had like 5 minutes left in the game by the time that tournament or that round ended. And if I didn't summon the Denko, I could have gone Washer, summoned another Prank Kid from the deck, and then swung over his monster so that I could be able to set up for a Butler board so that he wouldn't be able to do anything properly, because once he link summoned into his Striker monster, I would have been able to kill it, but I didn't do that because I was just stupid. Total turnout, it was really fun. I went for the first time with my new team, and I really like the deck. So I'm going to go into how this deck ended up running. So I ended up running, obviously, 3 of every Prank Kid. I love this deck like it's nothing. I don't think I would not run this deck in general. I do have the 1 double or nothing. I do love this card. I do love the Utopia double combo, but like I said, with Nibiru now in the game, the only time you're going to pull this off is in game 2, because your opponent's not going to expect the double or nothing. But if you just want to run this as a control variant, I would rather have this as like a Twin Twister or something, because every time I saw it in hand, it was useless. Every time I thought about going into the Utopia, it was kind of moot, because my opponent, I always expected Ash, so having a monster that can be Ash straight from the deck, and it would literally waste an Exceed summon that I could use for, like, Abyss Dweller or anything else like that. So it was a loss for me just because I did that. Set rotation, I love this card. This is my only type backer removal to handle Mystic Mine, and I would just give him Fusion Recycling Plant, because this was barely used, but I do need this in the deck, because there are times when you open up all monsters and like a set rotation or a terraforming, and you're going to need to play that. So realistically, I do recommend that you run the Fusion Recycling Plant, because Fusion Recycling Plant at all times is a useful card. But I think that, if anything, I would run 1 set rotation, at least 2 or 3 Twin Twisters, just to handle the type of back row hate that you need. Terraforming and Reasoning. I always sided out Reasoning. I run a lot of monsters in the side deck, and I feel like that would be necessary, just because you can take this out for any other monster in your deck or in your side deck, and then you don't have to worry about hitting like Pankratops or Denko off of it and losing something. Because even though you can hit Pankratops and it would be pretty profitable for you, I would rather be able to save this for summoning a Prank Kid from the deck. Fusion Recycling Plant, it is a great card. I recommend this for everybody that plays Prank Kids, just because it's such an oppressive card. 3 Mystic Mine. This card, again, it put in a lot of work today. The Bow Wow Pass, where my opponent has a monster, or has 2 monsters, you have 1, and it's literally just activate Mystic Mine, have Bow Wow on the board, and then if they manage to out that Mystic Mine during their turn, you can go into a Washer, summon 2 monsters, have a setup for the next turn, and then they won't be able to handle it. If they don't have a way to handle the Mystic Mine, it is literally you just make Rocket, you don't summon anything else, and you keep attacking directly until your opponent can't handle it anymore. And then they'll finally learn to like summon Borreload or something, and by that time you're just going to make Butler and swing for game. You amass so much advantage off of this card that you need to run 3 Mystic Mine just because this is a deck that can utilize it very well. I do run 3 Prankid's Place. Out of any card, I believe that you could run, instead of this, you could run no more Invocations. Invocations aren't necessary. I mean, they do come up, but with so much consistency in the deck, you don't need to run this as much. So this is a completely different variant, slightly at least, compared to my last deck. And I think with no back row hate other than in the side deck, and that's only set back row, and with no way to continue or have a contingency plan for any type of previous setup, I feel like that ended up giving me the loss in multiple games. Also, because I have no hand traps, I feel like that was another thing. I could also run Ash Blossom, which I really do think I should have ran. Ash Blossom, Ghost Ogre, Effect Veiler, one of those would have been really well. Or even with the new Orcus combos, or with the Orcus deck, I could have main decked Lancia, which is also a really good option. But I didn't run any of those, and I feel like it was a bad choice for me. 3 Pandemonium, 3 Pranks. This is a Prank Kid deck. You need your setup for your game. 3 Desires. It's necessary in this deck. I initially didn't run Desires, or I was running only 2. I took them out, and then I put 3 in, because Desires is just so good in this deck. Like, you run 3 of them as basically anything, so you don't need it in the main deck as much. Or you don't need to draw into all of them. And if you Desires away 2 of your Prankid monsters or 5 of your Prankid monsters, you still have 7 to work with. So it's never a problem in the deck to run. We do run 2 Invocation. I feel like that was a bad choice to make. If I decided to run Twin Twisters, I feel like that would have been a better choice than to run this. My biggest problem with this deck is the fact that Roxy's doesn't provide enough of a profit in this deck, because you can just banish and then draw, but you don't draw into anything good because it's all consistency and no like setup or follow-up cards like Twin Twister. So if I had Twin Twister or even Called by the Grave, I feel like I would have done a lot better. Polys, just a really, really good card. Instant Fusions and Plan. Like I said, I really think that I should have had some type of contingency card to search off of the Desires. The Reasoning, the Double or Nothing, and the Invocations are definitely going to be replaced in the coming future. Whether or not I get rid of the Plan is completely up to whether or not I feel like I need the second Plan, but the second one did end up coming up because just being able to link summon during your opponent's turn and have the ability to shuffle cards in your opponent's graveyard or in your graveyard back into the deck are really great, and you can pull it off really consistently. I believe I pulled off the 4 summon combo every single match at least once, and with the 4 summon combo, I ended with Plan, Pandemonium, Pranks, and 1 Prankid monster and 1 Prankid monster in hand, and I knew for a fact that no matter what, I would be able to pull off my combo, just to set up so that I could Butler them the next turn or something like that. But I feel like in the future, when this deck comes to a higher grade for the deck, I feel like I should 100% be running back row removal, just because Mystic Mine is a crazy oppressive card in this deck. Extra 3 token, or my tokens. I ran 5 in case somebody had the balls to run Ojama Trio and Ojama Duo. Toad, Abyss Dweller, Double, Topia. These, I love the card. don't get me wrong, I love Utopia Devil. It is a win condition in itself, but it requires so much setup, and any skilled player can just play around this that I don't need it. I can replace it with pretty much any other card in the deck, and I feel like these would automatically become Borrelsword and Phoenix or Unicorn and Phoenix, just because if my opponent summons a Nibiru token for me, it's one zone that's just being completely clogged up. So, or if you take one of their monsters, and then they Nibiru you, or they Nibiru you and then you toad them, you're losing resources right there because you don't have enough to go for a full combo. 2 Rocket Ride, 2 Washer, Butler, 2 Doodle, 2 Bow Wow, and Roaster. Just because I wanted to make sure I could handle every deck pretty well, and I always recommend that you should run this. People are cutting a Washer, people are cutting a Bow Wow, but I feel like they're so necessary because during your turn, or during your opponent's turn, you're going to make a Washer, and then during your turn, you're going to make a Washer to try and OTK them. During your opponent's turn, you're going to Bark, and then you won't want to recycle it back into the deck, so you'll be able to make another Bark for later. You could also make 2 Bark, 1 pointing down, 1 pointing over, and then 1 pointing to a Washer, and that's 8,500 damage right there. So it's really, really good with a field spell on the field. But it's really, really good, and I really think it is necessary. Sadly enough, I put this in for the Thunder Dragon matchup just because if I deal with the Titan, I can handle it. But I didn't end up facing against that deck, so I don't even know what to say. If I had the Borrelsword, I 100% would have played it, and if I had the Phoenix or the Unicorn, I 100% would have played it, and I really feel like I ended up hindering myself because I wanted to run a gimmick. This is already a really gimmicky deck, so realistically, like I said, in the future, you 100% need back row removal. Called by the Graves could be necessary in the side deck. In the main deck, it's not as necessary. And then I ran my 2 field centers because I wanted to be that deck that put 1 on each extra monster zone. But for the side, I ran 3 Lancias. These put in absolutely no work. I didn't see it once, even though I sided in against every single Orcust matchup I ended up facing against. But in testing, it was very, very oppressive, and it forced my opponent to just pass their turn. 3 red reboot. I expected more Draco and Altergeist to be facing against. And every time I sat down, there was a Draco player right next to me. So I did make the right choice, but when it came to red reboot, I didn't need it as much. And I thought it was necessary in regards to this, but I never saw it, and I feel like needing it was a necessity because playing against Altergeist, if they flip up a Gozen match or Rivalry, you basically might as well pass your turn. I don't know. The deck is really hard to find a matchup for. Next one, Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion. This actually put in a lot of work. I thought that this was the best hand trap to go into in regards to the regional, and it really was. I played against the 55 card Orcust player, and he went to try and OTK me, and just because of Bell, I was able to survive another turn. And I feel like it was a really smart option. If anything, I could consider main decking it with the Ash Blossom, just because this can out Called by the Grave and DD Crow. And a lot of people think that if you side in DD Crow, it's going to win you because the Pranked monsters go and add back those targets back to the hand. But it's worded in a way where if they DD Crow the monster, you still add the other one. So it's still really good. 2 Denko Sekka, insanely good card. Should I have run a 3rd? Absolutely not. I had saw it in every single opening hand when I needed it. So I really think that I needed it as much as possible. I do run 1 Skill Drain. This was against the Musket matchup. Because I knew that Muskets were such a hard counter to my deck, I wanted to make sure that I was able to handle them. But in retrospect, I think I should have ran this and Kaijus, because Kaijus would have been able to handle pretty much every other matchup that I ended up facing, including strikers, because if I went into the Kaijus, I could play the Kaiju, run into my opponent's monster with a Utopia double, and that would be game right there, because with the Utopia double, it's 7,900 damage, and then you burned them for 500, so it was game. So if you are going to run the double or nothing build, like I am right now, which I might continue to run or not, depending on whether or not I'm actually going to main deck the Kaijus or back row hate. But I really think that out of anything, I'm going to run back row hate, 2 Pankratops. This put in a lot of work, but every time I saw it, I thought about how more useful it would have been if it was a Kaiju. 100% this would have been a Kaiju, and I feel like that should have been the smarter play for me. And then finally, a Tornado Dragon. Because when I face against Pendulum, or any deck that doesn't utilize the graveyard very well, like Draco, I decided that Draco isn't a good thing, but something like Anti-Meta, this really counters it, because then you can just blow up Ultra Geist spells, Sky Striker spells, because Sky Striker can deal with Abyss Dweller, but this is a lot more oppressive against Sky Striker, because they're going to activate multi-roll. You're just going to pop the multi-roll. They're going to activate the Area Zero. You pop the Area Zero. Yes, they'll get the monster, but they won't get to send the spell or trap that they're wanting to send. So, overall situation, I didn't run backer removal, and it lost me a lot of games. Mystic Mine, crazy good card in this deck. It wins you games right away if played right, and if played absolutely wrong, you're going to lose it. And finally, this deck handles pretty much everything. Overall, the deck did exactly what I wanted it to do, but it didn't have a contingency plan for later. So in the future, I'm going to be looking towards more hand traps and less gimmicks in the deck, but I am going to be looking at seeing if I can still fit the Utopia double, just because it does win games in situations where it doesn't seem like it's going to win you. So, long story short, thank you so much. This is Prank Kid Duelist, trying to make Rogue decks meta. Have a great day.